Hello friends, so today's video is going to be comparing the authors that are quite popular and have written a lot of different books, not just books within a series, but different series or standalones, things like that. How often we actually know which of those is the most well received. So what I did was over on my Instagram stories, I took various different authors who have written multiple works, and I had the little quiz option and asked people, hey, you don't have to have read these books, but just what is your perception based off of what you've seen online of which of these, there was only 4 options for each, which of these 4 do you think has the highest rating? I wanted to add a little extra factor to this where it's kind of me against all of you to see how well I did in this also. So in the quiz function, you have to select the correct answer, and I specify this is not actually the one with the highest average rating. This is my guess. And then I wanted to go through and then do the reveals here, but also just chat through how often social media leads us to have a certain view of something when in actuality there's so many other readers out there who aren't engaged with the online book community and aren't on Twitter, aren't on BookTube, aren't on Instagram. And so sometimes I think we have this idea that something is really hated or really loved, and obviously my Instagram is not going to be something that somebody should do their thesis on using that as a valuable resource or something, but I just thought it'd be just at least within our little community here, a fun way to gauge how accurately our view of something matches the actual average rating. All that said, jumping into it, the first one would be Joe Abercrombie, The Blade Itself, Best Served Cold, A Little Hatred, and Half a King. I went through and I wrote down, I highlighted which was my guess, and then I also had them in the order that all of you voted on, and then I wrote down the average rating, and then what the actual ranking of those was based off the average rating, and now we're going to compare and contrast. So I guessed that A Little Hatred would be number 1. You guessed that The Blade Itself would be number 1. From there, you had Best Served Cold, then A Little Hatred, and then Half a King. My guess was that The Blade Itself, the reason that it was ranked the highest is because it's the most well-known. But from what I typically see, I find that when something is really popular or an earlier work by an author, that's the one that obviously a lot of people have tried. And the more people you get trying, the more people that test the waters with that author's first work or really popular work, the more you're going to get people who are like, I don't really like this. And Best Served Cold and A Little Hatred are books that are within the same world as First Law. You technically don't have to read them first, but I find that typically anytime you have continuations, you're going to get the fans looking at them. That's why I said I thought A Little Hatred would be higher up because it's the first book in the Age of Madness. And then I thought Best Served Cold would be pretty high too, right? Because it's also a standalone that comes after. Half a King is his YA work. It often gets shelved and categorized as adult. We don't need to get into that conversation. It's YA. But I think a lot of people don't even know this one exists. And the people that have picked it up, they tend to like Joe Abercrombie for how gritty he can be, and you obviously have to pull the reins back a little bit when you're writing YA. Referring to my little sheet here, the way that you all ended up ranking these 4, you had The Blade Itself, Best Served Cold, A Little Hatred, and then Half a King. I had A Little Hatred, Best Served Cold, The Blade Itself, Half a King. So we swapped a few of them in there. And the actual order, I'm going to read the average ratings though, because I think that the difference is pretty surprising. So I'm going to start with Half a King. I'm going to go from the number 4 spot up reading these. So Half a King is 3.95. That's kind of what I expected, again, because I think you're not getting what you expect from Joe Abercrombie with a YA series, although I do think it shows how versatile he is as an author. But either way, that one was at 3.95, and then very close. Best Served Cold was 4.16. The Blade Itself is 4.17. A Little Hatred is 4.46. That's very high. That's so high. I mean, in general, all of these are very high, so, hats off to Joe Abercrombie. But I was surprised just how much higher A Little Hatred was. Regardless of whether you partook in the survey over on Instagram or not, I would love, as we go through these, for you to say where you thought they would end up, and then you can kind of compare and contrast. So you can play along as well. But that's it for the Joe Abercrombie one. Switching now into adult Sanderson. So we were all right. It's not that surprising. The order that you guessed was the same order I put them in. We have Way of Kings ended up being number 1, The Final Empire, Warbreaker, Elantris. That's not that big of a surprise, but again, I want to read the average ratings because I think that's where this one gets a little bit tastier, a little bit more interesting. So the average rating for Way of... Actually, you know what? I'm going to start at the bottom again. Elantris is 4.17. That's still so high for the work that a lot of people are like, I don't like this one as much. To still be 4.17 is incredible. But then we have a pretty big jump with Warbreaker being at 4.27. The Final Empire is 4.44. That is so high, especially for a book that has as many ratings as that one does, because a lot of people check out The Final Empire. What I was saying about Joe Abercrombie, where First Law I thought would be a little lower because it's the one that so many people check out. Even though Elantris is a standalone and it's an earlier work, and even though Warbreaker is a standalone and a lot of people do think it's really fun, The Final Empire, this is my guess, I could be wrong about this, but I would say The Final Empire is the one most people start Sanderson off with. It's very popular. It's a completed trilogy, so it's also not something like Way of Kings that's projected 10-book series and broken up into 2 5-part arcs, and the 5th book's not even out, and they're huge books. So anyway, The Final Empire kind of breaks that rule of it's the author's main work that people jump into, so it's probably going to be lower. And my perception is that a lot of people, even though, of course, there are those that don't love it, end up really liking it. It's not too complex, I think, for a lot of people, but it's still complex, and the characters are engaging. It's got familiar tropes, but he does interesting things with it. And it just is like that balance that it's going to fit a lot of people's tastes. So 4.44. Way of Kings, oh my gosh. 4.6. That's such a high average rating, and there are other ones that are even higher. If you'd like to see an entire video where I kind of compare where I've ranked the Cosmere to where the average ratings would rank the Cosmere, I'll have a video that I did for that down below, because some of where the average ratings places things is quite surprising, and I don't always agree with it. But anyway, those were the 4 main adult Sanderson works. We'll get to his YA books in a second, but transitioning to a different author now. This one would be V.E. Schwab. So the works that we're going through would be Addie LaRue, A Darker Shade of Magic, Vicious, and This Savage Song. That was the order in which they ended up ranking based off of your votes. So a lot of you thought Addie LaRue would be number 1, and you know what? You were right. Addie LaRue was number 1. I thought Vicious would be number 1. I thought it would be that secret underdog. Vicious was in the 2nd spot. So it went Addie LaRue, Vicious, A Darker Shade of Magic, This Savage Song. So once again, V.E. Schwab is an author who writes both adult and young adult. And the young adult one is the one that a lot of people apparently have liked the least, which I think would be interesting to compare for authors that tend to write adult versus young adult, and they're more so known for their adult works. How then are their YA books perceived versus authors that start out in YA and then write adult, and then how are their books perceived? I kind of want to do a video about that now. Anyway, getting off on a... Let me know if you'd like to see that video. I think that would be really interesting. Do we really let authors push the expectations, the demands of the readers? Do we really let them have wiggle room? Do we really let them try new things? Or are we like, stay in your lane? That would be an interesting video. Anyway, so the average ratings for these, This Savage Song is 4.02. So still very high. Still very high. A Darker Shade of Magic is 4.06. So you all had placed A Darker Shade of Magic based off your votes in the 2nd place spot. I, once again, that same rule that I mentioned with Abercrombie, I think Darker Shade of Magic is the one a lot of people reach for first, or it used to be anyway, and it's very popular, and it was for a while very popular. It also has a really cool concept when you describe the plot of there being these parallel Londons that this one man can go between. I think that's such a cool just catch. It gets your attention very quickly. But unlike Mistborn, I don't think it has that. It's such a great balance of what so many fantasy fans are looking for. And my perception was I've seen a lot of people go into it and being a little underwhelmed. I think it was very, very hyped. And I guess that proved kind of true because it ended up being in the 3rd place spot. But anyway, like I said, I thought Vicious would be the underdog. But it was 4.20, so it was in the 2nd place spot. Addie LaRue is 4.25. I thought Addie LaRue, my ranking was Vicious, and then I had Addie LaRue in second, Darker Shade in third, and then The Savage Song in fourth. So I thought Addie LaRue would be just a little lower because I've seen a lot of people being very critical of certain aspects of that book. So this is an example of a time that what I view and what I see here on the internet did not prove true of what so far an actual bigger scope of readers have felt about the book. We did tie again for the next author, which would be Leigh Bardugo, except for we got different ones in the right spot. You all didn't get it exactly right, and neither did I. So the books we have for this one would be Six of Crows, Shadow and Bone, Ninth House, King of Scars. We all agreed that Six of Crows was going to be number one, and spoiler alert, it was. It was the one that had the highest average rating. We'll get to that in a sec. So where you all ranked them, you had Six of Crows, number one, Shadow and Bone in the second place spot, and then you had Ninth House in third, King of Scars in fourth. I had Six of Crows in the number one spot, and then I had King of Scars in the second place spot, and I'll explain my reasoning in a second. I had Shadow and Bone in third, and Ninth House in fourth. So I actually went back and forth on Ninth House and Shadow and Bone as to which I thought was in the third and fourth spots, but the reason I had Six of Crows in the number one spot, that's the one everybody loves, right? I mean, you all apparently thought the same thing. I probably don't really need to elaborate too much on that. King of Scars fits that criteria of you're only going to get a lot of the hardcore fans reading it. So even though I didn't love it, and there have been a lot of people who haven't loved King of Scars that I've seen when they've reviewed it, I still think you're getting her fans picking it up, as opposed to Shadow and Bone, which because of the Netflix show, because it's one of her earlier works, it's super popular, it's a lot more tropey than some of the others. I was like, that one is not going to be first or second. That's why I thought that one would be third or fourth. And then I debated whether it would be ahead of Ninth House or not. And ultimately I thought maybe it would, but I was wrong. Ninth House did beat Shadow and Bone. So the rankings for Leigh Bardugo based off of the average ratings, we have Shadow and Bone in fourth place, Ninth House in third, so I was so close, King of Scars in second, and then Six of Crows in first. So we all got Six of Crows, right? King of Scars, I got that one, but I mixed up the last two. The lowest with Shadow and Bone was 3.97, and then Ninth House is at 4.04. The reason I thought this one was going to be lower is, well, maybe I'm clouded a little bit by my feelings because I didn't love Ninth House, but I still recommend it if it sounds like something interesting to you, and I can see it having a certain group of fans because it is very dark and twisted, very dark academia setting. But I thought that it had a more specific group of fans, the same way that something like Nevernight has a very loyal fan base, but it's a little bit smaller. I thought that would be the case for Ninth House. I thought her YA fans wouldn't love it as much, and I thought that it wouldn't be fantastical enough. But hey, you know what? I was wrong. It beat Shadow and Bone. King of Scars was at 4.19. I'm betting that's higher than a lot of you thought it would be. And then Six of Crows is 4.47. Now on to N.K. Jemisin. So I have not read basically anything by N.K. Jemisin. I will be picking up the 5th season very soon. And she, I think, is mostly known for the 5th season. And then The City We Became is a newer work. So I'd say those two are very well known. And then some of her earlier works are not the ones that I would say people talk about as much, at least that I haven't seen people talk about them as often. So I wasn't really sure. You all had 5th season, as did I, as number one. In fact, we agreed on the first two. 5th season, City We Became. I think for the reasons I just said. They're the most popular and they're the ones that we know. And you all had the 100,000 Kingdoms in the 3rd spot, and then in the 4th spot you had The Killing Moon. I swapped those last two, and that ended up being the exact order, was the order I thought. So we were almost all right on. So this is really interesting. You are welcome to provide your commentary as to why you think these average ratings are lower than every single other author on this list, despite her being an award-winning author. But the 5th season is the only one that has an exceptionally high average rating. The rest are still high, but they're lower than I thought they would be. So the 100,000 Kingdoms at the bottom is at 3.87. And then above that, The Killing Moon is at 3.93. The City We Became is 3.94. So very close together. And then 5th season is 4.27. Going now to Sarah J Maas. We all were wrong. We all thought A Court of Thorns and Roses, and when I say we all, I mean the majority of you and then myself, thought A Court of Thorns and Roses would be number 1. It's not. This might be the most delicious of incorrect assumptions here. So we have the 4 options were A Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, Crescent City, and then Catwoman. Your ranking based off of your votes was A Court of Thorns and Roses, number 1 spot, Throne of Glass in the 2nd spot, Crescent City in the 3rd spot, Catwoman in the 4th spot. I was similar. I thought A Court of Thorns and Roses would be number 1, but I thought Crescent City would be 2, then Throne of Glass, then Catwoman, because Sarah J Maas is known for the romance, the smutty, smoochy times, right? And I was like, Crescent City's adult. She's giving the people what they want. But I thought A Court of Thorns and Roses would be higher just because it's so popular. And I know there have been people who have picked up Crescent City who don't typically read Sarah J Maas, but they're like, okay, well, it's her adult work, so let's see. And then I thought they would be disappointed. And yeah, we were all wrong. Crescent City was number 1 by a lot with its average rating. So Catwoman at the bottom is 4.11. Throne of Glass and ACOTAR are exactly tied as of right now at 4.18. I was not expecting that. I thought that Throne of Glass would be a lot lower, but I was wrong about that. Crescent City, though, 4.44. Let's go back to Sanderson now. So the next set of Sanderson books are all middle grade or YA books, and I think a lot of us here on BookTube, the only YA series we've tried by him would be Skyward. I have read Skyward, Rhythmatist, and Steelheart. And so I haven't read Alcatraz, which is the other one that I asked all of you to vote on. Alcatraz is very, very middle grade, whereas Rhythmatist I've seen considered middle grade, but I think it's the same maturity level as Skyward, or at least the tone to me feels similar. So I had a mix of his younger works. That's the point of all of this. So the votes came in exactly the same. How I placed them was how you placed them. Skyward, Rhythmatist, Steelheart, and then Alcatraz. And we were right. We got all 4 of them. So Alcatraz is 3.90. Steelheart is 4.12. Rhythmatist, it's at 4.20. Skyward is 4.5. 4.5. I was shocked. That is very high. I thought Skyward was... I know a lot of people end up loving Skyward, but I was not expecting it to be so high. I don't know. I don't know if there's much else to say. Just, I thought it would be lower. That's all that's left to say in that sentence. I thought it would be lower than that. Not because it's not good, but 4.5 is a really, really high rating. Now, the last one, Naomi Novik. So, you all had, based off your votes, Spinning Silver number 1, Uprooted number 2, Deadly Education 3, Temeraire 4. I swapped Deadly Education with Temeraire because Temeraire to me I think is more widely appealing to adult fantasy fans. Deadly Education is very different than her. I mean, what I like about Naomi Novik is that you never really know what you're going to get with her. Ended up having another tie though for places 3 and 4. Temeraire and Deadly Education are both 4.03. So technically, we were both right. Uprooted is 4.04 and Spinning Silver is 4.2. So, I mean, I definitely like Spinning Silver more than Uprooted, but I think Uprooted was published first, and I think that makes sense then that would be lower based off of the idea that people that picked up Uprooted might not want to pick up Spinning Silver, and so maybe more of her fans are going to be picking that one up. I mean, I also just think it's a better book, but that's not an objective fact, right? That's just my opinion. But there you go. There's the average ratings for those. So for the most part, we were usually pretty close, although I sometimes thought slightly different from you, but there were only a couple times where I got more of them in the exact right spot. Something else I think would be really interesting beyond just what I touched on earlier with how often do authors who are known for writing one age range do well in the opposite age range. Beyond that, I also think it'd be interesting to not check average ratings, but to check popularity and the amount of ratings to see which books it turns out are more popular. So if you think that would be interesting, let me know. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all later. Bye.